Hey, what's up guys? Another build today, and this one's going to be a little bit different because it's actually for my little brother. He's turning 18 in a few days, and this is going to be a nice little fresh upgrade for him and definitely a significant upgrade from his current PC. Now, one thing I want to make clear right away is that this is by no means a build guide or build template or the best price to performance PC that you could build for this price. You could definitely build something a bit faster with maybe even less money if you didn't go with flashy components like RGB, sleeved cables, and premium cooling components. I did want this one to look a little bit interesting for him and also run pretty quiet as well. We'll also be finally building in the Phanteks Evolv Shift Air, the higher airflow iteration of the infamous tempered glass variant, which didn't pan out too well for system thermals. So we're going to talk about the components, take a look at the quick build, and then have a look at how this thing actually runs in games. So all up, this build will set you back around $1,700 US or $2,500 Australian for my local AUD viewers. And again, this is by no means a build template or guide for you guys unless you are fine with overspending on flashy components like RGB lighting, premium cooling, and sleeved cables. Having said that, this build is definitely no slouch, so let's take a look at the hardware. Of course, the focus of this build revolves around the Evolv Shift Air, and you guys know that I absolutely loved the original tempered glass version of this case, but man, did that thing get so hot. Now, I want to give a quick shout out to PC Case Gear for sending over the Evolv Shift Air for this build. If you guys are located in Australia and are looking for parts for your next build or maybe a pre-built gaming system, you should definitely check them out. I'll leave a link to them down below. But seeing as so many users complained about thermals in the original Shift, Phanteks answered back with this, the Shift Air, replacing the tempered glass side panels with a breathable fabric mesh. Honestly, I think Phanteks are actually onto something here. I personally really like the look of it and just how functional it is. It also allows you to see the system internals and lighting without having them being choked behind glass. The only thing I'm worried about here is system noise being too audible through the fabric, but we'll see how that ends up in the final build. The main reason I went with this case was mostly due to the super compact footprint, seeing as he will be having this on his desk, and I really wish that more companies would adopt this vertical design. Build quality here is also superb with clean anodized aluminium panels, and the CPU and GPU compartments are separate, each get their own side panel to pull fresh air from. Now, the use case for this build mostly revolves around gaming, but my brother also uses Adobe Photoshop, Premiere Pro, and occasionally other production type software, so a bit of additional multi-threading performance is definitely in need. So the CPU choice here was a pretty much no-brainer. We went with the Ryzen 5 3600, 6 cores, 12 threads, overclockable, and overall just very thermal and power efficient. I would consider this the mainstream king of CPUs right now, a really solid balance between excellent gaming performance and multi-threaded power when you need it. We're slotting that into the Aorus X570i Pro Wi-Fi motherboard from Gigabyte, super neutral design with a bit of RGB on the side, active cooling for the primary M.2 drives, and a pretty beefy VRM. As a recommendation to you guys though, as I've said in previous videos, you are much better off saving some cash going with a B450i motherboard like the Asus Strix or MSI Gaming Plus. Those motherboards can handle 3rd gen Ryzen no problem at all without paying extra for PCI Express 4.0 and a server grade PCB. Nevertheless, the X570i is a great choice if you need an X570 ITX motherboard, although a little overkill for this particular build, but that's okay. Now for the memory, I reached out to G.Skill and they happily provided us with a 32GB kit of their Trident Z Neo modules, so a big thanks to them. These are clocked at 3200 MHz, but with super low latency at just CL14, so these will pair nicely with the Ryzen 5 3600. Also, I personally think this RGB illumination is still some of the best looking on the market, despite being one of the first designs out. Of course, the lighting is fully customizable, and we'll take a look at that in the final build. Alright, now for the GPU, we're going with the RTX 2060 Super, and this specific card is the XC Gaming from EVGA. 2 slots, fairly compact with a neutral design, and a nice dense heatsink for premium cooling. Honestly, at this price, we could have gone with the higher performing RX 5700 XT from AMD, but 2-slot cards like the Power Color Red Dragon won't fit in this case, and neither will the Sapphire Pulse as far as I can see. You'll see why in the final build. This 2-slot card from EVGA was hard enough. My brother also currently has an NVIDIA GPU, the 6GB GTX 1060, so he's already pretty familiar with how to update the drivers, how to use Shadowplay to record his desktop and games, and having the ability to also now stream his games using the NVIDIA NVENC encoder is something that I can potentially see him using down the road. He's currently gaming on a 1080p 144Hz monitor and plays mostly DX11 titles, so the RTX 2060 Super is certainly plenty of power for that and a nice upgrade from his GTX 1060. The power supply that we're going with is the SF600 Platinum from Corsair, definitely a little overkill with a 600 watt 80 plus platinum efficiency rating, but it should make for a pretty much silent operation. Also, the cables are pre-sleeved for the Platinum series, making ITX systems look a lot more appealing and totally worth the price premium in my opinion. Storage is pretty simple here. We're populating the primary M.2 slot with a 2TB Intel 660p NVMe drive, one of the most affordable NVMe drives on the market. If you don't mind sacrificing a bit of read and write speed for a higher capacity, then this is a pretty solid choice. Now, to cool the 6-core Ryzen 5 CPU, we're going with the best cooling strategy in this particular case, a 120mm liquid cooler in push-pull. The one that I'm using here is Corsair's H60 V2, and on that we'll be mounting two of the NZXT Air 2 RGB 120mm fans. We'll also be installing another two 140mm RGB fans at the front of the case to assist in airflow a little bit, and of course linking those up to the NZXT Hue 2 lighting controller. So let's get this little RGB gaming monster up and running. So the build went pretty smoothly, and I'm especially happy with the cable management, seeing as there really isn't that much room to hide things in such a visually open case. One thing that was a bit of a challenge was the GPU mounting, seeing as by default it is mounted backwards with the graphics card facing the interior of the case. Of course though, that just wouldn't make sense with this airflow setup and while utilizing those fabric mesh panels. The problem there was just how tight the fit was once you factor in the power connectors, so any cards taller than this one simply aren't going to fit with this flipped layout and also with the fan directly behind it. Overall though, the build turned out quite nice visually, especially the GPU compartment, which looks super clean. The RGB of course is completely up to him. Teal and purple though, how I've configured it, is always a nice combo. Now let's talk about the thermals and the tweaks that I made for the Ryzen 5 3600. So of course, the first thing that I did was upgrade the motherboard BIOS to the latest version and then install the latest chipset drivers for the best performance and stability. Testing the system in games though, I did notice the R5 3600 was getting a bit warmer than I'd like, hanging around 75 degrees C at a room temperature of 21 C. The GPU on the other hand was absolutely fine, about where I expected, sitting anywhere between 68 and 70 C and happily boosting to just under 2 GHz. So the reason that the CPU is so warm is due to the pretty aggressive voltages. This is something that we've talked about with previous 3rd gen Ryzen builds. In gaming, I'm seeing the R5 3600 running upwards of 1.4 volts. Under a heavy CPU load like Blender, it drops to around 1.35 volts, but the CPU temps were in the low 80s. To fix this, I took what the CPU was naturally boosting to in those workloads, which turned out to be 4 GHz, and set a lower manual voltage in the BIOS of 1.2 volts, which is perfectly stable. This dropped the CPU temps in games by about 10 to 12 degrees, whilst also lowering the CPU fan speed. It's during the heavy CPU load that we see the biggest thermal change, where the R5 3600 barely peeps above 60 degrees C now under sustained rendering. At idle, the system barely makes a peep, the GPU fans don't spin at all until they're under proper load, and I've configured a really conservative fan curve for the radiator and case fans. The fabric material does obviously allow more noise to permeate through it than the tempered glass side panels, but seeing as thermals are significantly better, your components are going to run a lot quieter in return. In terms of gaming performance, this system runs really well and it's going to be a serious upgrade from his current pre-built system. If you guys want to see discrete reviews for the R5 3600 or the RTX 2060 Super, I've done full-length videos on those two previously, so feel free to go back and watch those. In summary, for a mid to high-end 1080p gaming system, these two make an excellent pair. So that about wraps it up. If you are looking to do a new build in the Evolv Shift Air, then it does totally make sense. I believe they are selling the fabric mesh panels separately as well. So if you do currently have the tempered glass version, I'm pretty sure that you can just whack the fabric mesh panels straight on. Of course, I will leave a link down below to the Evolv Shift Air and the rest of the parts for this build for those of you interested. As always, guys, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.